Welcome to That 30 Show, a podcast where we talk about the good, the bad, and the surprising parts of our 30s. I'm G, and I'm finally 30. I'm excited to find out if 30 really is the new 20, because if it is, then the best years are yet to come.
And I'm David. I'm entering my mid-30s. I used to have no back pain or trouble sleeping, but now I live off a healthy diet of self-help books and dream of being in bed by 10 p.m. every night. Join us each week as we try to figure out together what life in your 30s is all about.
Welcome back to That 30 Show.
Welcome back. And welcome to our guest this week, Jono. Jono, welcome. How's it going?
Jono!
Oh, I'm so excited to be here, you two. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you on. We're going to talk about a lot of different things, but just right off the bat, acknowledge it's still June right now. So it's still technically Pride Month. And we thought it'd be so fitting to have you on to share a bit about, how you relate to that in any way. And so, Jono, is it okay if I do a bit of an intro for everyone so they know?
I doubt I'll be able to stop you. So just lay it on. Yeah, I'm pre-cringing.
The man, the legend.
Oh
wow.
So, where do I even begin with Jono? I'm not exaggerating when I say he's perhaps the most talented friend I know.
He's already cringing.
So, Jono is, for me, first and foremost, he's a musician. He is a voice coach and artistic director of a cappella group in Vancouver called Wings Vocal Collective. So music is a big part of his life. But he's also a prolific home cook and foodie. There is not a restaurant he won't at least know about. I'm pretty sure about that, and be able to pinpoint specifically on a map where it is. But other than food and music, he is also an athlete, a gym rat. I don't know if you like that term, but I think you are, because you're in there every morning almost, like G. And you're on those records too. You're like, those records they keep of the people who show up the most. You top that at your gym all the time.
The moment that I walked into that gym and saw that board and joined, I was like, I'm going to be on that board because I love public displays of like feats and celebration of commitment and whatnot. And I'm on the board.
But it's not just about the gym for Jono. I've seen and heard that his volleyball sets are the stuff of legend, and he's not too shabby at badminton either. Jono has what I feel is savant-like memory, which I get to witness day in, day out as his colleague. And last, but certainly not least, you may recognize his voice if you watched My Little Pony or A&W's $3.99 burger commercial.
Yes!
Jono.
Woo! Jono, oh my gosh.
Thank you.
David, it maybe would have been easier if you just listed off things that Jono can't do or not good at.
I'm shaking right now. I'm really shaking.
What Jono can also speak French?
That won't be happening this episode. Oh my gosh. Thank you, David. Thank you. Yeah.
Is there any part of that description that you would like to contest or provide any clarification on?
No, I think that was extremely comprehensive. maybe a bit more than any viewer or any listener ever needs to know about me. But a lot of those pieces might tie into what we talk about today. So I'm glad you did mention a few of them. So thank you.
Yeah.
But that would be enough.
Jono's like, this is all the stuff that you missed, actually. Pulls out a list of stuff that you forgot.
No. Thank you. Very flattering, you two. But and just thrilled to be here, really.
Well, let's dive right into it. There's so much we can explore with her life, Jono. And but as I mentioned, one of the reasons we want to have you on is to recognize Pride Month and your personal journey as part of that community. But I personally really don't like boxing anyone based on any sort of one thing. So I'll let you sort of unpack it for us. Between being a musician, an athlete, a home cook, how much of a role does your queer identity or gay identity, however you would like to describe it, how much of a role does that really play in your life? Is that a big part of how you think of yourself?
It's a nuanced question, David. I lived a lot of my life telling people that being gay or being part of the queer community should only be sort of one facet of all of who I am. But the truth of the matter is, as I get older, as I sort of develop into the human being that I imagined I would be or didn't imagine I would be, it really becomes evident that my queer identity, the journey, the coming to terms with my gayness, and all of what that makes me as an adult is undeniably present and prominent in everything I do, from the music that you talked about to the athletics and the fitness journey that I've been on, to my relationships with people, and even in my job. So it's been a journey in and of itself to acknowledge and to just concede to the fact that my queerness is very, very much part of my identity, and to just celebrate that. And I guess that's what this month is about, right? And before I go and say anything else, I promised I would say this, is everything that I share today regarding the LGBTQ community is just a reflection of my personal experience. It is narrative, it is personal, and it does not speak for any other individual in the community. I would never dare to do that, but I do dare to share my story in an honest and fearless kind of way.
I was going to ask you if you think that that's a common arc that people with this identity face in terms of potentially starting off wanting it to not have to be a prominent part, but then conceding that. But I guess, as you just said, you can't really speak for anyone else. But
yeah, anecdotally, David, I would say, yeah. It's also because the world is slowly but surely giving the stage to queer individuals, and the spotlight is being put on many people in the community, and tokenization and sort of the issues with that aside, the spotlight is much needed, right? Is how can I tell my life story, and how could I hear the life story of a queer individual without knowing how that interacted with their coming of age and the struggles that they experienced, and the uniqueness of those struggles in relation to that part of their identity. So I would say anecdotally, it is something that I've noticed, but the willingness to engage with it varies across different narratives. And for me, I'm just so blessed and happy to even just like coming on the show and discussing this is a huge step. The fearlessness and the resolve that it took to say to David, yeah, I will do the Pride Month episode is huge. And yeah, it's still a moment of vulnerability for me. And I just thank you too for creating that space where I can do that.
Thank you for coming on. I guess like Jono, I think I've met you a few times. I remember you just being like super fun and cheery, and you're just greeting us when we did our co-op conferences, and just like such a joy to be around. But I don't actually know you that well. I don't think I know kind of your backstory or how you grew up or how you kind of came out. So I'm actually really interested to start there, if we can, to kind of set the stage for people.
Totally. It's so sort of vulnerable but empowering to be able to do this on like as public as possible of a platform. I'm happy to share. And David knows bits and pieces of the story, but it really does start in Coquitlam, which ironically, David spent a little bit of time growing up in Coquitlam as well. It's a lovely suburban area of the Metro Vancouver. Growing up very much in that sort of Hong Kong Canadian, sort of Confucianist values, filial piety, all of the worst of all the worlds, because also, I'll be really honest with you, also, my parents were very, very, and are still very active in a Protestant Christian church that is also Chinese. So it's like, I don't know, like a double, triple, quadruple whammy of sort of odds stacked against me in terms of being able to express that part of who I was at a young age. Just little snippets that I want to give you are sleepovers with friends at church where, I'd hear friends in their sleeping bags whispering, "Oh, do you think John's gay?" Yeah. Oh, spoiler alert. Yeah, I was. But I'd deny it like the plague, right? There's no way that I could really admit that to my peers at age 9, at age 10, at age 12, even at age 14, 15, 16. I went to high school during a time where there was no gay straight alliance. And if there was, it was like 3 people, right? And a well-meaning teacher that sponsored this program, but there was no safe space. Especially in the suburbs, I would say. And so growing up, coming out was this sort of like fabled event, this fabled notion of coming clean about the biggest and darkest secret that I had ever kept from anybody. And
did it feel like that personally, or was that how you felt it was projected by other people coming out?
No, it was legitimately 100% my lived experience. And when I tell this story to other people in the community or other sort of friends who have the same sort of like same sex attraction or whatever they go by, they are like, whoa, that sounds intense. It wasn't like that for me. There are a lot fewer stakes for other people because it was everything from what my parents thought about me and expected of me to what sort of the church expected of me. And then sort of that enmeshment of the two, right? Church and family was connected in a way that was highly, highly suffocating and confining. But at the same time, it really trained me to be that performer that you tout me to be. Right. It's wild to think that essentially I was training to be an Academy Award winner and being straight. But here's the crazy thing is like not anybody in the world would have said that I was convincing as a straight teenager in any way. So it's just, it was all for naught, but it was certainly a part of who I was is that hiding, that masking of my true feelings and just sticking with the status quo and ensuring that all of what I did in the classroom, on stage, because I was already sort of very, very involved and very much a go-getter at a young age, is ensuring that all of that would obscure that part of my identity that I did not want people to know.
So I'm wondering then, it sounded like your peers kind of had like an inkling. So did you have a fear, or was it more of like the internal struggles of like how you were kind of brought up? You weren't sure of like your own identity. You were kind of torn between that. Or was it like more so that you were just afraid to come out?
I think it's like fear is very complex in this particular situation because the fear goes beyond what an individual would think of me if I were to come out, right, in high school. The fear kind of like branched out to if one person knows and this person knows another person and this person has a parent that knows this person's parent who attends a church, who then might know people from my church, and then my parents would find out, and then my extended family would find. So it's sort of like fear of that snowball effect. And that's always the case. I would say that this is the one thing I could say applies to a lot of people in the community is you have to keep it secret because you never know who's going to say what to whom. And it's the kind of information that you cannot control and that you cannot take back ever.
So there's no like beta release where you
no. And
early adopters.
Exactly. And the truth is like even as a young person with young people as friends, right? Like 15, 16-year-old, my best friends were all in that same age range. I didn't even feel safe enough really at that age to confide in people that I called my best friend or good friends because society was not at a place where like you can trust someone your age from your generation to have your back on this. You just never know. I just never knew back then whether I could fully trust. And I think it wasn't until university where I realized, hey, hormones, life, people are dating, like it's becoming harder and harder to deny this and to hide this. And also just as a human being, I was starting to rip at the seams from trying to keep this a private part of my life when really it didn't need to be private. And it became unhealthy that part of my life was fully private or that I tried so hard to keep it private. And university is when the notion of coming out even became on my radar. And it was something that I could even try and explore.
So what was the turning point then? When did the dam burst? And how
Music school. And I think that's why I said, like, as much as I want to deny that being queer has been part of my journey and part of all of the facets of my life, I can't. And, it's so wild because it's that same music school. It's that same music degree that my parents vehemently disapproved of, that ironically and serendipitously opened my eyes to a life where I could live free of keeping this secret and where I could live accepted by other members of this music school community where being gay, being lesbian, being bisexual, being queer in any way wasn't just accepted. It was very normal. I mean, I majored in opera. So we're all going to make our assumptions and guesses about sort of what type of environment, right?
Sure.
The performing arts scene creates for people in my position. And I just realized people knew before I even became friends with them, sort of who I was and what type of human being I was sexually attracted to, right? It became almost impossible to hide, and it became pointless to hide, because the majority of my friends, especially in the vocal performance program, were not just allies, but they were members of the community.
So you don't have to get into details, obviously, in terms of the conversations that may have happened with friends or relatives or family. But just generally speaking, or as much detail as you would like what was the reaction then when you made the courageous step to share?
The majority of the people my age, by the time I was ready to tell people my age, so friends my age, cousins and siblings, I started sort of that laundry list in my early 20s. And I'd say by 24, the majority of the people that I spoke to on a daily basis, they had become aware. And the thing that tickles me, I swear you to, when they'd be like, wow, really? And I'd be like, yeah, but like, are you just like acting surprised to flatter me? Or like, cause I you know, like many of them were like, yeah. And, and like, so we ran the gamut of different reactions, but the ones who were closest to me, and I think this was a testament to how much trust and how much love they had for me in my current moment. Like my best friend in the entire world from childhood genuinely maintains to this day that when I came out to her, she was shocked. And I'm like, sure. Like, I guess, and I guess like there was kind of a correlation between how often people saw me and how cemented in their minds my persistently straight persona sort of remained, sort of emblazoned in their impression of me. And I was like, well, that's great. I'm glad that I was able to convince you, but sorry. And I often apologize because I didn't like that I was lying to them. So it's weird. It's a lot of these conversations went in the direction of, I'm sorry, I didn't tell you earlier. I'm sorry that I lied.
What do you mean? What did you lie about? I've never thought about it in that way.
Well, you
know, pretend to have girls that you were into? I don't get it.
Sometimes. You know, I'm not proud of that, or sort of just denial, right? Like I was also really sorry because a lot of them really went to bat for me and stuck up for me when the rumors did sort of go around the mill, and when there were situations where they felt like they were defending my honor and sort of like, you know, defending my reputation, when the truth is like, no, like they were, everyone was right. It's just, was I ready? No. Hell no.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a personal thing, right? Yeah. Like when you're ready, you do it when you're ready. So then what about your parents?
Yeah.
Or your family?
So there's a little bit of a detour that we'll make before we get to that, which is for between the ages of 24 to 28, which is when I met David actually, and I met Yuji, you know, in like an early career at UBC. Yeah. I actually experienced my first long-term relationship with a man and my first long-term relationship period. So a lot of relationship milestones, sexual awakening, if you want to call it that. But that all happened prior to even the inkling or notion of telling my parents. So I hid an entire 4.5-year relationship from my parents. And in that 4-year period, 2 of those years were spent living under their roof. Like I was a mastermind.
I am exhausting though.
Pathologically skilled liar is what I would say. It's like the lying was pathological, but it was also extremely, extremely well calculated and well like executed. And it just goes to show, like I said, right, the emotional intelligence that you have to suffer through all of that deception, all those smoke mirrors, the denial, the lying without blinking an eye, right, to my parents. Like and I call it emotional intelligence because it's, you know, it is in many ways not saying the truth and being able to emote in a way that would protect yourself from an unwanted emotional interaction. that is intelligence. That's like I became really savvy about how to present myself. And it's so sad that that's how I developed that sort of emotional prowess. But like, it certainly trained me because it prepared me for the day, June 29th, 2019, the day that I wrote a 1,000 word letter to my parents, and my sister delivered the paper letter to my parents in person. And I asked her to sit them down and force them to read as much of it as they could get through as my way of coming out, because I did not trust myself or my parents to really react and to process the information that I would be conveying to them in any sort of productive or civil way. Yeah. But also because I was not confident that their emotional intelligence would have allowed them to emerge from that interaction and that episode unscathed. I think giving them the space to process it in sort of a written form rather than in a verbal form was my own defense mechanism, but also a move of pure grace for them. Because a lot of people were like, you thought way too much about how they would experience your coming out. It's your story to tell. No, I love my parents, and I loved them so much that the entire time that I knew they were reading those letters, and I was, with friends, holding my hands as my sisters, like they're reading it.
Oh my God.
Mom's on the couch, et cetera, et cetera. I was just catastrophizing about how I had single-handedly ruined the rest of my parents' lives by handing them that letter. And that's all I was thinking about. Not about me, not about my future, just about them. And so for those people who are on that boat where they're like, coming out is going to destroy my parents' lives, and I am afraid of that, I hear you. I was that kid. I was that son, and I continue to be that son. I protect them for the types of interactions and things that I know will trigger them, will upset them. I can talk about current state a little later, but still to this day, it is my responsibility, I feel, as a son, to think about the way that they will react and to think about their emotions in this, because they are people too. And as much as I am a person and need to be respected, I also feel the same way about them.
That's so rough. I feel quite emotional hearing that. I think it comes back to emotional intelligence a lot. And sort of the somewhat more funny take on this is that you are one of the most emotionally intelligent people I know, Jono. In contrast, I am relatively below average on that.
Your words, not mine.
Yeah, my words. Yeah. But actually, it relates to your story, which is this idea of, on this podcast, I talk a lot about living an authentic, true self and like saying F you to anything else. But in a way, emotional intelligence and having compassion and consideration for others requires you to rein that in a little bit sometimes. It's not just about, I'll just do whatever I want. This is who I am. You take it or leave it. That's sort of more my approach, but arguably, not even arguably, but like patently very unproductive and immature in many situations. And then for you, I would maybe be like, Jono, like, screw it. If your parents love you, they accept you, blah, blah. But sometimes that's just not the reality of it, right? And you got to be intelligent, emotionally intelligent enough to navigate that as a human being, not just as this is me, take it or leave it.
Yeah. Here's like a little musing of the day for you two. Is one of the biggest indicators of emotional intelligence is the ability to empathize in a non-reciprocal situation. Is to empathize with somebody's experience, knowing full well that they will not be able to do that with you. Is to offer empathy as an act of grace rather than an act of expectation and reciprocity. Is if you can empathize with somebody who will never be able to empathize with you, that is the highest order of emotional intelligence.
So hard
well, I was just going to say, this is interesting because, I feel like there are so many people out there who would have the mentality of like, okay, I'm going to like live my life, live my truth. I'm going to say whatever I want to say, do whatever I want to do. And if like you can't accept me, that's too bad for you. But like, I never really thought about how, say, for example, people coming out, it's not even just about the fear of like, their parents or their friends would say. It's more about like considering their feelings too and how like they would react, how they would feel. And you are almost kind of like sheltering yourself and sheltering them from that, right? I just never really looked at it through that lens before.
Well, for me, that emotional intelligence piece that you just put forward for us, Jono, it reminds me a lot about my relationship with my partner as well as my mom. These very close relationships are the ones where that empathy is needed the most. I shouldn't say needed. You need that in everything, but it has the most impact if you are or aren't able to provide that. Like, I'll be frank, there are many times when in an argument, right, with a partner, it's hard for me to give them the understanding that I know I can give when I don't feel like they understand me. There's I was kind of like, oh, I want to be understood, because if it's just me understanding you, then what about me? What about me, my feeling of being understood? I want to feel understood too. But I think what you're saying is that, do you as an individual have the capacity to extend that empathy even when you know that they're not going to understand you?
Yeah. And when you remove the prerequisite of being understood to try and understand others, that I really think is the highest order of like the emotional intelligence that I strive for. And I can do it sometimes. I like, in no way am I saying that like when I go to my parents' place that I'm just like, you know, everything's tickety boo and that like we get along swimmingly. No. Like it's give and take, right? And slowly but surely since 2019, I've been more liberal about the usage of the term boyfriend or partner. Not that liberal. I'll be really honest. Not that liberal. You know, or do I opt for those more comfortable euphemisms like roommate? And it's just understanding that another person that sees how I choose to approach my relationship with my parents right now, and sort of how forthcoming I am about that part of my life with them, and how much pressure I put on them to accept me or not, right? It's all my decision and my prerogative. And if my priority is to ensure that my mother and my father are still in my life for as long as they live, and if that means needing to sacrifice the opportunity to share a part of my life with them forever, I would still do it. And that's just me, right? This is one of those moments where this is my experience, my choice, but I would do it because there's a part of me that understands that this relationship that I have with my parents is too precious to give up. And I can only say thank you a million times to my partner who understands this and is up there with me on that sort of heightened and highest order of emotional intelligence, that he can be my partner, not be accepted by my parents.
Wow.
And still hear me talk about them, engage with my other family members, and not feel ostracized, alienated, or like disregarded. Just knowing that they will probably never understand the life that I live with him, but still love that I have for them resonates. That I think is sort of like the core thing that I wanted to share about my relationship with my parents right now, is that it's by no means perfect. There's a lot of room for improvement. The prognosis is unclear, but it doesn't stop me from wanting to continue trying.
While Jono's talking, his emotional intelligence is making me emotional now, because I'm just thinking about the scenario. For me, it would be so hard, because if I had to censor a part of myself or what I can or cannot say around like my mom, I just can't even imagine that scenario, because we're so close. Like, we tell each other everything. And if there was that point where she would not accept something and where I had to censor myself because of it, and I just couldn't communicate with her on something anymore, like, I feel like that would just crush me. So, I mean, I can only imagine how difficult that is. Yet you still want them very much to be a part of your life, and you want to be a part of their life too, right? Because, you know, a lot of people are also just like, okay, well, if you can't accept me for who I am, you're not going to be a part of my life anymore. And that's that. But wanting that while also wanting to be yourself and your true identity and being able to navigate that, that's just so challenging.
I wouldn't say that I'm able to navigate it. I would say that I am navigating it whether I like it or not. And sometimes, completely mess up, right? And other times there are days where I'm like, you know what? Like, what would it be like if I just told them, like, actually, I won't be seeing you until you accept me and my boyfriend. No, like I like even just those words, like I can't. It's so difficult for me to imagine a life where I am decidedly giving up that part of my past, of where I came from. And then the added nuance of my parents being such a huge connection to my faith, which I want to talk about as well.
Yeah, let's talk about
that. I want to talk about it. Which
before we get into that, I was on the edge of my seat. My heart was pounding. What happened after they read the letter?
Well, yeah. Unfortunately, they didn't read the entire thing, and it's unfortunate because my sister couldn't really verify exactly how far they got. A lot of things were disclosed in that letter. One of my biggest regrets was not putting some of those more poignant points. I just wrote it too well, I think, in many ways. It was kind of like, it was poetic, and it kind of like,
it was a story.
It like ramped up into like the part where where there's a plea for like this I would love to continue, having this loving relationship with you. I don't think they made it to the end. And to be honest, I wouldn't blame them, right? The first few paragraphs are tough to swallow. And to be honest, you two, I thought that I would want to just revisit this document over and over. I've deleted the hell out of that document.
Really?
It is so still, so painful to think about my parents having to read it that I don't even want to read it. The empathic distress of imagining my mom sort of like weeping on the couch, as my sister said, while reading that letter is enough for me to just want to delete that hell out of my life, because it's just pain that I knew that it caused. Even though it was my story and my authenticity and everything that I deserved the stage to share, the fact that it hurt them and the fact that they couldn't cope with it makes me not want to revisit it. So yes, the next few years were tough. We never really hashed it out. They just were really clear that contents of the letter or what they did read, they didn't agree with. They said that they weren't happy about it, but that there was a moment where they both assured me that no matter what, I would be their son, and that their home would be my home. So I think, now that I look... Yeah.
How did that make you feel?
At the time, it made me feel nothing because it was too soon to know what that really meant, right?
Okay.
As you know, because you work with me, I'm very, very much about what is the work?
Yeah.
What are we doing, right? Like what is this going to mean? When is the money going to be where the mouth is, right? Is basically essentially what I was like, what does that mean that I'm still your son, right? And like, okay, well, we can fast forward to 2023 now, which is we still see each other once a week. I was moved out by then, and I still am. Since then, I've purchased a home with my partner. I have.
Congrats.
Yeah. They know all of these things, but they refuse to engage. They refuse to ask questions. And for the 7 minutes, you two, that I toured my parents around my house, I could see them, not my house. I don't have a house. I have an apartment that I, worked my butt off to buy, that I would have wanted to share with them at least over dinner or a movie night or something. Yeah. The 7-minute visit looks like the most painful experience as of late in my parents' life. And like sort of just their body language and their eyes made it clear that like the visit was going to last no longer than 7 minutes. So
that's
and it is unfortunate. And my sister was like, did you put away all your picture frames? And because we like to put Polaroids on the fridge, right? Of the shared experiences that we've had. No, I was like, heck no, this is my place. So that there are places where I've grown, and there are places where I've chosen not to relent, but I did not force them to stay any longer than they needed to. And especially as we walked into the bedroom, right? Like that's the kind of thing that's like, nope. Like you could see them seizing up. And I was like, yeah, okay, we're going to get out of here and have dinner. This was not as positive and exciting as I thought it was going to be.
Yeah. Like it is unfortunate because you want to share all these great moments with the people that you love the most. But at the same time, like it's part of that empathy to be like, okay, maybe this is my parents trying their very hardest as well to,
this is already them trying the hardest.
Yeah. Right. Like this is them doing their best because I'm their son and they love me. And this is this is them trying, even if you wished it could be different for them. Maybe they're like, this is the best we can do. And we're genuinely trying our hardest.
I think that when they agreed to it, they also saw it as, okay, we're going to give this a try. We at least owe this to him. But every single time I've tried to arrange a subsequent visit, even if it's like my partner's not going to be home, they always opt for a different option. And it goes to show that at the very end of the day, there's nothing harder than to reckon with your son's queerness and gayness than being in his home.
Yeah.
And seeing his life. And I think it sucks because, of course, every mother wants to know what their adult son is doing and how happy they are and how healthy they are. And to see if I've learned anything from being raised by her. Like, you know, I wrap my plastic bags a certain way, or I buy a certain type of sauce because my mom taught me how to cook. Yeah. And I would love to be like, look, Mom, this is the oyster sauce we use, and here's the chili crisp that we get. And like, I bought a whole bunch of these plates because I like the shape, because we used to serve food like this. So many things that we could have created common ground and shared stories about, but like none of that opportunity because of that barrier for them.
So I know we want to get into the church thing. I want to ask hopefully a quick question that might relate to that, but I'm just so curious, what is it about the situation that your parents are objecting to? What is it that is objectionable? What is it?
What a great segue. What a great segue.
You know, because it's like...
And this is going to ring true for a lot of listeners who have known people in the LGBTQ community, but who also have this like parallel identity of having grown up in a church, Christian church, or any kind of organized religion where homosexuality is regarded as a sin, as not like even a possibility. So what I would say is the majority of the disapproval stems from their religious beliefs as Protestant Christians from more of a conservative background in time. Mm-hmm. I'm going to shout my old church group out. I came out to them when I was in my 20s.
Wow.
So another reason that my parents really thought that the carpet was pulled from underneath them is like my pastor at the time knew. Everyone in my church group of 20 people, of young adults that speak English, that were part of that sort of like English ministry of the church that I belong to, were fully aware. So I found a way to reconcile my identities. And I was really hoping maybe deep down that reconciliation could continue with my relationship with my parents, but it did not. Because the time and the place that my parents were indoctrinated into Christianity, and the time that I was brought up, and sort of the cultural shifts and societal changes that the church has needed to respond to over the years, afforded me the opportunity to live authentically in that space. And so for those who are listening who didn't think it was possible to be a practicing gay Christian, it is possible. I was just at church, cried my eyes out, David, because it had been a few weeks, cried my eyes out in the back of that building, realizing how important this was to me and how important it was that I got to continue doing this, and how happy I was that I found a church whose mandate is social justice and welcoming people from all backgrounds to explore a relationship with Christ.
So it's a whole tangent and we don't have to go there, but my intellectual curiosity brings me to want to ask about the religion part a little bit, in the sense that, like, was there ever a time when you looked at your faith as the reason that your parents don't accept you, and that you were like, oh, I don't like this faith or this religion? How does that work? Because you're a part of a community that has influenced some people like your parents to not accept people like you. And yet this is a community that means a lot to you.
Yeah.
So how does that work?
That's a good question. I think I'll start by saying that I'm one of the rare few that had the capacity to see this as a gamble that I was willing to take. Because you're taught your entire life, if you knowingly sin against like the word of God, that, you know, you're destined for a lifetime in hell. And that is what my parents feel is going to happen to me. I am of the mind where even if, and this is wild, you two, buckle up. Okay. Even if I'm wrong, and I, you know, and this whole Christianity thing turns out to be real, like real as hell, David. Yeah. And I am like at the gates of hell. And they're like, you know what? Sorry, Jono, you've had sex with too many men and this is where you're going. I'd be like, and I was like, but I, you know, tried to live a Christian life, and I, you know, tried to invest in my faith, and, you know, I love the church. I love God and all that stuff. I would still be like, that was a life that I wanted to live. I'd rather be wrong at the very end than to give this up in anticipation of being wrong. basically I'm taking this whole notion that heaven and hell are the be all and end all of spirituality. And I'm just stuffing that into people like my parents' faces, being like, yeah, sure. I'm living this life because life here matters more than this sort of like fabled conjecture based afterlife. Why am I aiming my life, current life, towards something that may or may not happen when I could just ensure that the decisions that I make on this earth align with who I am, what I believe in, and that serve my purpose and my values? So that is why I remain in the church, in my faith, regardless of how wrong it may seem and how misguided it might seem to somebody who adheres to the traditional viewpoint.
Well, I've also heard just like a lot of Christians or, you know, whatever faith you believe, that like your relationship with God or with that higher power is so unique. Like it's your relationship with God, and everyone has their own relationship, you know?
They do, but it's just interesting that we're taught to have that personal relationship, but that like within this individual relationship you have, there are rules and parameters, and it's actually quite like contradictory. And so what I would say is organized religion, because of how it's developed over time, has transmogrified into something that oppresses and that doesn't really represent the joy, the great joy and comfort that can come from relying and having faith in something that you cannot see and you cannot understand. And like, I'm getting emotional just saying this because it's like, how could I even begin to think that I understand this world enough to not have something like that to lean on?
So apart from the letter, did you ever have these kinds of conversations with you're very compelling in what you're saying. So
they've never given me a chance, and there's been no appetite for it. But what's wild is I've stumped a few pastors in my life saying that. When a pastor hears me say this and they're like, well, I can't question your commitment, but I also like don't know how to reconcile how I feel about your sexuality with all of what you've said. And I'm like, why do you have to? If I'm wrong, I'm going to be the one that gets sent to hell, not you.
Don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it, bro, is what literally essentially is what I said. And I think at the end of the day, that's kind of how they come around, is like, they're like, well, who am I to judge who deserves this place in this church?
I want to bring it a little bit back away from heaven and hell and back to earth. You mentioned, you're having relationships with, too many men for God to whatever. So let's dive into that as much or as little as you like. What are the challenges or joys you've experienced in navigating romantic relationships as a gay man? You mentioned you had your first long-term relationship in your early 20s. I don't know what stories or a window into what that is to help us understand more about, because it's so easy for a straight person to be straight in a straight society, right? Like, we don't really think of.
Let's start with that, David. I don't think it's easy at all. And here's why. I find heteronormative relationship structures to be very, very oppressing. I fully thought when I got into my first relationship that it would echo exactly what relationships I'd seen in my social circles, right? Like the expectations around like gender roles, the expectations around how monogamous a couple is. Basically, I was fully expecting to have a straight relationship with a man. And especially because most of who I hang out with are of East Asian descent, but like, sort of Canadianized, similar to the type of people that we are. I was telling myself that my relationship needed to look like my best friend's relationship, and that like after a few years we would get married. And then after we got married, we would think about adopting. Or before that, we would try and buy a home. And then after that, we would retire, and our children would take care of us. And then I realized, what the hell? Why? Like literally, why? Like why? Why was I putting so many of my eggs into this basket that I only thought I wanted, or that I wanted because other people had? Because then I started to see these, heteronormative relationships break down.
Yeah.
right? Trouble in paradise. Oh, like it's not that easy to buy a home. So it's not as linear as you think in Vancouver. Or like weddings started to happen and then divorces started to be discussed, right? In our late 20s, as early as our late 20s, people were discussing divorce. And I was like, what was I aiming my life towards? And then I realized that in addition sort of to the departure from that heteronormative relationship and sort of like that positioning in the social circle that I had always imagined myself to have with my boyfriend, I realized that there was a lot more that I needed to ask myself about what I wanted out of my relationship. And there was a lot more about the world that I needed to learn before I committed myself to a specific type of relationship. And so after my first relationship, I made it a point when I entered my second relationship to discuss the idea of ethical non-monogamy and explore yet another departure from the life that I had always imagined that I would need to live, that I was accountable to. And so there was almost like a second coming out where I was like, oh, and in addition to being gay, we also are sexually non-monogamous. So I won't go into the details of what that specifically means for me, but it means that I have more than one sexual partner occasionally, and that my life partner is not my monogamous sexual partner.
I saw G had like a pause to process what that meant.
I was rolling my eyes towards the sky because I was trying to think of what that looks like.
Add 1 + 1. Do you have any questions, G? Or comments?
I don't have any questions. I mean, I definitely, like what you just said, right? It looks so different for everyone. Did you ever have, I guess, when you had your first partner, identify those like gender roles? Did you find yourself doing that?
We tried to. And to be honest, if we were two different people whose personalities, whose interests, and whose upbringing caused us to fit more of those traditional gender roles, despite the two of us being born men, it is possible, right? You can all, but like at the end of the day, no, because gender roles time and time again have been proven to be kind of harmful for certain people and can kind of be confining. It became a sort of a humanistic experience to free myself from what people have written and have said about what my relationship needs to look like and what role I ought to play in my relationship just because of my genitalia. Like it confuses me still to this day that we've lived this long as a society using this gender binary for things that don't require it, that don't require a binary at all.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah, like there's the more common stuff to talk about. So like, the gender pay gap, but also just like stupid stuff like who drives in a couple. I literally sat all of my straighty friends down. I'm like, hey, which one of you is okay with your wife driving? None.
What?
Yeah, it's wild.
What?
And I'm like, she's a better driver than you, bro. Like, I know, because you suck. Like, I have literally had that conversation. Like, no, yeah, she just doesn't drive. And it's both ways. We all like to blame the men for being like, oh, yeah, he's oppressing her. He doesn't think she's a good driver. No, girls lazy too. And like, just like,
I don't want to drive.
There you go. I mean, no offense, right? But I'm just saying, like, these are cemented. It's in our blood. And all I can say is like, both of us have the same genitalia in my relationship. But only one of us has a driver's license, and it's me. Like a lot of times I actually like to, as an icebreaker, as a social experiment, when I'm with other male or men, cisgendered men in a relationship, I'll ask, I'm like, hey, which one of you drives? And do you both have licenses? And why? Right? Because that's how you start learning, is why. Who determines, for example, for something small like this, the driver? Well, it's generally the person who's better at it or the person who likes it more. That's as simple as it needs to be.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's not.
Oh, well.
So like things like that, David, I start to sound like a broken record, even to myself. I'm like, of course, Jono is like finding another way to break the mold and to like combat stereotypes. But the truth is, my life naturally, or as a result of my upbringing and the experiences that I've had in my young adulthood and now my adulthood, have led me to make these decisions and live my life this way very organically, very naturally. And they felt right. That's what this month celebrates for me, is like coming out as a non-monogamous homosexual, like, there's no need to keep my voice down anymore. This is my life. And I'm so happy. And it's just so exciting that I get to say this out loud in front of you two. And it's going to get published on Spotify or whatever. And it's bonkers that it's taken me 32 years of my life to get to a place where the basic notion of being proud of who I am and the decisions that I make, that it took this long. Holy. But thank you.
I have to ask, what are G and I missing out on in our heteronormative lives?
So I don't want to frame it like that. I think, and that's the tricky thing, is this is all based on choice, right? Like, I have plenty of friends who are monogamous in a gay relationship, and that works for them. It does not work for us. And there are a number of reasons, emotional, physical, whatever, but I should have the choice to make. That's my choice to make with my partner. And as soon as we felt free to make that decision for ourselves and to tell people that that is the decision that we are making, is the moment that we really felt like our relationship started.
Wow.
Is when you remove the external factors that influence and dictate how you have a relationship. Once those are gone and you're doing the relationship on your own terms, that is the beginning of a lifelong relationship, or at least what I hope to be one.
Gee, what about you? Would you be willing or wanting anything that diverts from the heteronormative relationship?
I never say never. I don't really know at the moment, but I'm not so stuck on the heteronormative ways to where I'm like, never. But I don't really know at this point, to be honest. Whatever works, right? You're not hurting anybody. You're like living your truth. You're living your life. Embrace it. Yeah. Totally support.
I love that you said that you're not hurting anybody. I mean, like, in many ways, though, we do have to tread carefully in the type of relationship that we have in respect to other partners and external parties, right?
For sure.
Like, you can hurt people. And I think that's where we're very mindful. But my decision to be non-monogamous should only have the potential and the ability to hurt your partner. And if you're not doing that, then really no one else deserves and should have any right to criticize or to influence that. But I will say, and maybe it's because it was David, you really reminded me that I had to reflect on this, which is the fact that it is very different, that the kind of relationship that I have as a cisgendered male with my cisgendered male boyfriend than the one that G would have as a woman with a man. And here's why. There are traditional gender roles baked into our society that I think are oppressing and compromising to women, especially in relationships. There's a power dynamic. There are expectations that cannot be easily unlearned and undone that make women feel like monogamy is the way that they can feel safe a lot of times in a relationship. And so the safety that I experience in my non-monogamous relationship is a privilege that I acknowledge every single day.
Wow.
That cannot be replicated in all circumstances if it were a cisgendered female and a cisgendered male, or even other types of relationships with gender diversity.
That's fascinating. I have so many more questions, but G, do you want to wrap us up with our last question?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think Jono kind of touched on this a little bit, but I guess our last question kind of wraps everything up. Like, what advice would you give to someone who may be struggling with their own identity or the coming out process? I mean, I know you're only speaking for yourself, but I think we have listeners, and, you know, if people may be feeling a similar way or if they relate in any way, like, what advice would you give them?
It's tough. A cop-out answer is one of my least favorite things ever. But I will start with that, which is that I cannot imagine what kind of advice I could have received that would have made my coming out any easier or harder. I'm just gonna be really honest with you. Nothing could have helped. And I think there's a lot of people that hear this and they're like, yeah, he's right. Which is like, I can give you my story. I can even tell you what I would do differently. we can fully analyze my coming out, my friends coming out, and we could try and glean as much sort of qualitative and quantitative data from it, but it will do nothing if it doesn't apply to your circumstances. And how I choose to act and how I choose to approach a situation is not going to be how anyone else chooses to approach their already very unique and complex and nuanced situation. So what I would say is I can share no advice that I would claim would help with the process. Mm-hmm. But I would say that what has always helped, independent of the coming out itself, is to ensure that when you are ready to come out, however that may be, in whatever way, in whatever context that may be, is if you are able to do it sort of in a gradual way and start building a safety and support net, the first coming out that you're going to have to the first person that's ever going to hear you say those words is going to be hard. And then it gets easier. As more people know, and as you reveal yourself to more people, you allow more of who you are to be loved. And I really say this so corny, but the more of yourself you allow to be loved, the more you will realize you are worthy of love, and the more that you will be able to love yourself. So in short, be vulnerable to the people around you, trusting that the people around you will respond to your vulnerability with love so that you can continue that journey of being vulnerable to yourself, so that the love that you have to give others can be given to yourself as well.
Mic drop.
I love that. Thank you so much, Jono. I mean, for that and everything else that you've shared. There's so much more, I think, that I would like to ask, but there's a lot to process and a lot to unpack just from the stories and the narrative you've already shared. So I think it's a good point to wrap it up for the day, unless, Jono, there's anything that we didn't give you a chance to share.
I just want to thank you two. You two do a lot of really important work on the show, giving people and giving yourselves a chance to talk about things in your own way that touch people in ways that you could never imagine. And what I hope for this episode and for future episodes is that someone like me might hear this and have something resonate with them and then feel empowered and compelled to pay it forward, which is what I feel like I'm doing today. I've had many conversations with David. David has supported me as a friend for a while now. And so to be able to sit in this room with you two, to pay what David has given me, which is his empathy, his care, to pay that forward to whoever might be listening who needs it, is an immense privilege and a pleasure. So just wanted to shout you two out for doing this really important work. And especially at our age, 30s. So much learning happens in these 10 years, folks. Thank you two, for providing a space for us to learn.
Well, thanks for saying that, Jono. That was so heartfelt. And I think that's kind of like one of the reasons why David and I started this podcast, was because we were finding that there was not enough podcasts about people in their 30s and like how everyone is living their lives in a different way and how to sort of navigate all of the different ways that people are living their lives in their 30s. So that's basically where we kind of got the idea from. And just thank you. And I feel like all of our guests so far, and you as well, like how vulnerable they've been with their life. I think I'm pretty pleasantly surprised at how open people have been on this podcast and just sharing their journey. And I'm certain that it's going to help people out there.
Well, in terms of having as much impact or paying it forward to as many people as possible, if you're listening to this and you enjoyed today's conversation, you can certainly help us out by giving us a 5-star rating on Spotify, or any rating that you think is reflective of the quality, or an Apple Podcast review. Those things really help us. And, we would love to have as many more guests on in the future as possible. If you're listening and you think you have a story you want to share, you definitely do. Let us know. Send us an email or DM us on our Instagram, where we still haven't really launched, but you can still DM us at That 30 Show Pod. And with that, I hope you enjoyed everything today. Jono, thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much,
See you
Jono.
at work tomorrow, maybe.
That was a pleasure. Thank you.
Bye for now.